Today we're going to start reading Ranger in Time, Danger in Ancient Rome. Chapter 1, Gladiator School. Marcus held his sword high in the hot Roman sun. Sweat dripped into his eyes, but he did not look away from his opponent. That was the first rule of being a gladiator. Defeat in battle always begins with the eyes, the writer Tacitus said. Marcus crouched low. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. The other gladiator would be fast and strong. He would have to be faster and stronger. Marcus leapt forward and jabbed with his sword. Smack! It hit the wooden post with a hollow thunk. Marcus Cassius! Vilius, the manager of the Ludus Magnus Gladiator School, shouted across the training ground. Do you not have work? Marcus nodded and dropped the small wooden sword to his side. It was the only gift Vilius had ever given him, a toy presented to him when he first came to live at the Gladiator School 5 years ago, after his parents died in one of the Romans' many fires. Marcus had been sold to Vilius as a slave to pay off his father's debt. Marcus had loved that toy sword at first. He played with it every day in the shadows as he watched the real gladiators train. But now that Marcus was 11, the toy sword felt silly. He longed for the day he could use a real sword. One day, Marcus would be a gladiator. One day, he would earn more than just his food and the corner in which to sleep. One day, he would win enough to have a real home of his own. But today was not that day. We have a new man arriving this morning. Make a place for him to stay, Vilius said. The barracks are full, so he'll share your cell. I will prepare his things for training. Vilius stomped off toward the building where the weapons were stored. Marcus hurried across the arena toward the row of barracks. The sun had barely risen, but the day was already hot and muggy. The sharp smell of smoke filled the air. Fires were common in Rome's crowded neighborhoods. Another blaze had ripped through the city last night. Another row of Rome's stacked-up apartments had burned to the ashes, while the emperor's fire brigade passed out buckets from hand to hand, trying to put out the flames. Marcus hated the smell of smoke. It reminded him of the fire that had taken his family and his home away. He lived at Ludus Magnus now. Vilius had told him he had a new family, Familia Gladiatoria. But this was nothing like home. It had been 5 years of cleaning barracks, delivering messages, and swinging a sword in the shadows. Sometimes Marcus felt like it would never end. He was 11 now, and it would be 5 more years before he could become a gladiator himself. Then he would be the bravest in the arena. He would win fight after fight the way Vilius had won. That was how Vilius had earned his position as head of the gladiator school. That was how Marcus would win his freedom. But not today. Vilius stepped into a tiny brick and stone room, spread out a new bed of straw for the new gladiator who would arrive that morning. He was a volunteer, a free man who would take the gladiator's oath, hoping for victory and riches. When he signed the agreement, the new man would give away his freedom, promising to train and to fight for a number of years. Marcus wondered why the man had decided to bind himself to gladiator school. Some volunteers did so hoping to buy freedom for a friend or family member who was enslaved. Others longed for the excitement and the honor. They thought that they would find those things in the arena. Marcus recognized the hope in their eyes when they arrived. He understood that kind of hope. 5 more years. Hurry up, boy, or there'll be no bread for you, Vilius called from center court. Marcus finished with the straw and headed back to the training arena. Outside the walls of Ludus Magnus, the street of Rome buzzed with morning work. Horses pulled carts, food vendors called out for businesses. Inside, the sound of gladiators in training filled the yard. Hector and Creus grunted as they lifted weights. Apollo and Cleto sparred with heavy wooden practice swords on the platform until Apollo lost his balance and fell into the prickly straw below. Cleto let out a growling laugh. He was the strongest of the gladiators here now, a fierce man with a thick scar across his chest. Cleto's muscles looked as if they were carved out of stone, and he had a temper of an angry bear. Marcus did his best not to cross Cleto's path if he could help it. Another man, Typhoon, clashed his wooden sword against the plaus, a thick wooden post in the center of the training ground, where Marcus liked to practice too. Whack, whack, thunk, whack, crack. Marcus watched Typhoon memorizing his moves until Vilius called to him, Marcus Cassius, come see our new gladiator. Marcus hurried to the gate to meet the new recruit, a young man named Quintus Flavius, who stood beside Villius. The new gladiator was tall, with broad, muscular shoulders. He walked with a brave swagger, but the boy had a boy's round, pudgy face. His big eyes didn't have the hardness of the other fighters, but he was new. It would come. Until then, he would need to stay out of Cleto's way. Take Quintus to the amphitheater so that he might see some of today's games, Villius told Marcus. He turned to the new gladiator. Then you will return to your cell. You are free to go to the baths or anywhere else in the city in the daytime, but at night you will be locked in. You belong to the Familia Gladiatoria now. Quintus nodded, but Marcus saw a flash of uncertainty in his eyes. Maybe it was regret that he had signed over his life for the coming years. Maybe it was fear. Perhaps it was both. Come, Marcus said. I will show you the amphitheater. The games will begin soon. Chapter 2. Shoot, score. Come on, Luke, go for it, Coach shouted. Luke dribbled the soccer ball between two defenders and gave it a hard kick right into the goal. Score! Everyone in the bleachers clapped and cheered. Ranger barked. Sometimes the noisy crowd made him nervous. But this noise seemed to make Luke happy, and that made Ranger happy too. Good job! Sadie gave Luke a high five after the whistle blew to end the game. That was some goal, Dad said. Ranger jumped up and licked Luke on the chin. Down, boy, Luke laughed. But thanks for your congratulations, if that's what you mean. I think that's exactly what he means, Mom said as she hurried Sadie past the playground at the edge of the soccer field. We can come back to the park later. Dad's going to make us some brunch. When they got home, Luke ran to set up the soccer net. You want to play in the yard until it's time to eat, Sadie? I'll teach you how to head the ball. Okay. Sadie ran to the garage to get the ball and tossed it out into the grass. Ranger started to chase it, but then, squirrel! The squirrel raced across the yard, waving its fluffy tail. Ranger had to leave the ball alone to chase it up the tree. Luke laughed. You can't be a soccer star if you keep chasing squirrels, Ranger. He jogged over and scratched Ranger behind the ear. Ranger leaned his head into Luke's hand. Next to snuggling with Luke and Sarah, chasing squirrels was Ranger's favorite thing in the world. That was the only reason Ranger wasn't an official search and rescue dog. He had gone through all the training with Luke and Dad. He learned to find missing people, even if they're in the water or in a building with lots of smoke. But to be a search and rescue dog, you had to ignore everything except your job when it was time to work. And Ranger couldn't turn down a good squirrel chase, no matter how much he wanted to please Luke. Ready, Sadie? Luke called. He kicked the ball high into the air. Sadie raced to get under it, but she missed, and the ball bounced away. Sadie chased it, and Ranger was about to run after when he heard a high-pitched humming come from inside the house. Ranger scratched at the door until Dad opened it. Then he went straight to the mudroom. There was the humming sound. It was louder. Ranger pawed through the blanket in his dog bed until he found the old metal first aid kit he had dug up in Mom's garden. It had only made this humming sound once before, when someone really, truly needed help. That someone was a boy named Sam, who had been making a long, dangerous trip with his family and needed Ranger's help. Ranger had found Sam's baby sister when she ran off. He had kept Sam from stepping on a rattlesnake, and he had warned the family of a buffalo stampede and rescued Sam's paw from a raging river. When Sam got very sick, Ranger had stayed by his side until he was better. Sam had understood somehow that Ranger couldn't stay with his family once their journey was over, and he had given Ranger a quilt square that said goodbye. Now, that bit of fabric rested next to the old metal box, and the box was humming again. Ranger nuzzled the leather strap until the first aid kit hung around his neck. The humming grew louder. Bright lights spilled from the cracks of the old metal box. It felt warm at Ranger's throat. The light beamed brighter and brighter until it seemed to swallow up the whole mudroom. Ranger's skin prickled under his fur. He felt as if he were being squeezed through a hole in the sky. All he could see was bright, hot light. Too bright. He closed his eyes until the humming stopped and the hot metal cooled. When he opened them, he found himself in a huge open space. This arena wasn't Luke's soccer place. Luke's soccer place smelled like grass and boys and hot dogs from the food truck at the edge of the field. But this place was much, much bigger. Many more people filled the stands. The seats were made of stone, and the air was thick with heat and shouts and strange animal smells. The floor was covered in something gritty. Ranger lifted his paw and sniffed at it. Sand, sweat, and blood.